Imagine waking up to find the police officer guarding the bank vault has suddenly changed the locks and claimed the gold for himself. Does that sound like security to you, or a heist? For 4 decades, the United States Fifth Fleet has patrolled the Strait of Hormuz under the self-righteous banner of freedom of navigation. They were the ultimate escorts, the self-proclaimed guardians of the global energy artery, spending massive amounts of manpower and resources to intercept piracy and protect international oil tankers. Yet, overnight, they have morphed from the gatekeepers into the wardens. On April 13th, following the complete collapse of U.S.-Iran negotiations, U.S. Central Command executed a staggering directive from the Trump administration, a total naval blockade of all maritime traffic moving in and out of Iranian ports. This is not a surgical strike, it is a sprawling dragnet. From major hubs like Bandar Abbas to the smallest coastal outposts, the blockade indiscriminately targets every vessel, regardless of its flag, cargo, or destination. Whether you are a commercial freighter or an international luxury cruise liner, any ship daring to enter without explicit American authorization faces interception, rerouting, seizure, or even direct military strikes. The panic was immediate. At least 2 cruise ships preparing to exit the strait frantically turned around upon hearing the news, terrified of being intercepted by American forces. But let us rewind the tape and look at the historical irony here. During the brutal tanker war of the 1980s, it was the U.S. Navy that launched Operation Earnest Will, committing massive resources to escort Kuwaiti oil tankers through these very waters to protect them from Iranian mines. Today, the script has completely flipped. The United States is now the one freezing a strategic choke point that sees an average of 77 vessels pass through daily. A narrow 39-kilometer-wide waterway that acts as the beating heart of the global economy. And here is where the sheer absurdity of this geopolitical theater reveals itself. If you are going to lay siege to a fortress, you bring your cannons to the gates, do you not? Yet, where is the vaunted U.S. Naval Armada? According to reports from April 14th, the Pentagon has deployed 16 warships to the Middle East, including the USS Abraham Lincoln aircraft carrier, 11 destroyers, 3 amphibious assault ships, and 1 littoral combat ship. It sounds like a terrifying armada, but look closer. Not a single American warship is actually stationed inside the Persian Gulf. Every single one of them is loitering in the Gulf of Oman and the northern Arabian Sea, conveniently parked just outside the striking range of Iran's coastal missile batteries. It gets even more bizarre. Defense officials have privately admitted that the specific operational protocols for this blockade are still being drafted. They do not even have the rules of engagement or boarding standards finalized yet. They are essentially shouting slogans first and trying to figure out the logistics later. And let us not forget the staggering financial burn rate. Sustaining a carrier strike group and over a dozen warships at high alert costs American taxpayers tens of millions of dollars every single day, draining the Treasury for a standoff with no clear endgame. As Senator Mark Warner pointedly asked, I really cannot figure out how the U.S. blocking the strait will make Iran open it. This is not an iron curtain descending on the Gulf. It is a papier-mâché barricade. It is a performance art blockade. A grand theatrical illusion where the actors cast a terrifying shadow on the wall. When a superpower has to shout its threats from a safe distance while hiding behind the curtain, it is no longer projecting strength. It is loudly broadcasting its own irreversible vulnerability. If Washington expected Tehran to wave a white flag under the pressure of this blockade, they tragically miscalculated. Instead of backing down, Iran's acting defense minister immediately put their armed forces, including the Revolutionary Guard, on the highest state of alert. They made it absolutely clear that any attack on Iranian ships, ports, or territory would trigger an all-out devastating retaliation. But this military posture is merely the appetizer. The real counterattack lies in the 3 terrifying trump cards Tehran has just laid on the geopolitical table. First, they have launched a masterclass in asymmetric legal and diplomatic warfare. On April 13th, Iran formally appealed to the UN accusing Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the UAE, and Jordan of facilitating American aggression, demanding a staggering $270 billion in reparations. Look at the horrifying math they presented. $125,000 destroyed civilian structures. By citing the UN Charter, Iran established a lethal legal trap. They argue that any unmandated naval blockade is an act of war, making the host nations co-belligerents. For Bahrain, which hosts the U.S. Fifth Fleet headquarters, and Qatar, home to the massive Al Udeid Air Base, this is an absolute nightmare. It echoes the historic 1986 International Court of Justice ruling, where the U.S. was condemned for mining Nicaraguan ports. Tehran is essentially forcing a brutal ultimatum onto these American allies. If you let Washington use your backyard to choke us, we will hold you entirely responsible for the financial and physical destruction. The second card is geographical strangulation. The Wall Street Journal reported that Iran is heavily pressuring the Houthi forces to slam the door shut on the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. If you think Hormuz is critical, Bab el-Mandeb is the other vital lung of the global energy supply chain. Historically, this narrow choke point handles roughly 7 million barrels of oil and refined products every single day. Combine that with the 20 million barrels flowing through Hormuz, and you are looking at nearly 30% of the world's daily oil consumption vanishing in the blink of an eye. Even if countries like Saudi Arabia try to pump their oil through bypass pipelines, they cannot possibly make up for this catastrophic dual bottleneck. Iran is quietly signaling that if their ports are not safe, no port in the Persian Gulf will be safe. But the third card is the one that truly makes Washington tremble. It is the systematic dismantling of the petrodollar. Since the historic 1974 agreement between the Nixon administration and Saudi Arabia, global oil has been strictly priced in US dollars, which is the foundational pillar, allowing the Federal Reserve to endlessly export its domestic inflation to the rest of the world. Iran is now rapidly accelerating non-dollar oil settlements, pushing trade agreements using the Chinese yuan and the euro. If Tehran successfully unites other oil-producing nations to bypass the dollar, it strikes directly at the financial heart of the American empire. Washington can launch all the military threats it wants, but it has no defense mechanism against a coordinated financial rebellion. Washington thought they were tightening a geopolitical noose, but Tehran simply grabbed the rope and wrapped it around the neck of the global economy. In the grand casino of modern geopolitics, the house does not always win when the opponent is fully prepared to burn the entire building to the ground. Now, if you want to measure the true temperature of American hegemony, do not look at our adversaries, look at our allies. When Washington hit the blockade button, the global shipping market did not just panic, it paralyzed, ships halted, brokers froze, and the world held its breath. But what happened next in the corridors of European power was truly unprecedented. Think back to 2003, when Washington pointed its finger at Iraq, holding up a vial of what looked like bath salts at the UN Europe, marched right alongside us into the desert. Fast forward to today, the response from our most loyal transatlantic partners. A resounding, unambiguous number, the United Kingdom, America's most historically dependable wingman, instantly declared it would not participate. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer and French President Emmanuel Macron did not just refuse. They actively began assembling their own independent, purely defensive maritime coalition. Why this sudden strategic awakening in Europe? Because reality has a steep price tag. After the catastrophic fallout of the Russia-Ukraine conflict, Europe is suffering from profound energy fatigue. According to economic think tanks, European governments have already burned through nearly 800 billion euros since 2022 just to shield their citizens from skyrocketing utility bills. They simply cannot afford to finance another one of Washington's geopolitical adventures. The cost of entirely replacing Middle Eastern crude, which accounts for a massive chunk of their imports, would instantly plunge the Eurozone back into a crippling recession. And while the West fractures, the East watches with cold, calculating clarity. When Trump casually suggested that a world starved of Iranian oil should just buy American or Venezuelan crude, Beijing did not even blink. During a routine press conference, the Chinese Foreign Ministry delivered a masterclass in diplomatic dismissal, reminding Washington that sovereign nations have the permanent right to choose their trade partners without foreign dictation. Let us put this into perspective. China is the world's largest crude importer, gulping down over 11 million barrels every single day. They have spent the last 2 decades meticulously weaving a hyper-diversified energy web, securing supply lines from Russia, the Gulf, Africa, and South America. They are largely immune to this kind of crude extortion. Trump's assumption that he could simply herd global buyers into the American petroleum tent, like compliant sheep, is not just arrogant, it is strategically illiterate. The American alliance system right now is like a magnificent, aging suspension bridge. It looks incredibly imposing in the travel brochures. But the very moment you drive the heavy, armored convoy of a manufactured geopolitical crisis across it, you can hear the rusted cables beginning to snap one by one. When your closest friends refuse to hold the ladder, it is usually a glaring sign that you are trying to climb the wrong wall. If you believe for 1 second that this blockade is about deterring Iran's nuclear ambitions or securing international waterways, then you are falling for one of the most elaborate geopolitical illusions of our time. To understand the true motive behind this crisis, you simply have to follow the money. And right now, the money is flowing like a tidal wave straight into the Gulf of Mexico. Let us look at the undeniable data. While the Middle East teeters on the edge of a total supply chain collapse, a fascinating and highly profitable anomaly is unfolding in the Atlantic. At this very moment, 68 massive, completely empty oil tankers are steaming toward American ports. That is a staggering 100% increase compared to this exact time last year. According to the energy analytics firm Kepler, United States crude exports are quietly surging to absolute record highs. These ships have a singular, highly lucrative mission: to load up on American crude and sell it at a premium to the desperate nations that Washington just forcibly cut off from Iranian oil. This is not a geopolitical coincidence. It is a meticulously calculated business model. Ever since the United States lifted its 4-decade-long ban on crude oil exports in late 2015, the Permian Basin in Texas has transformed America into an undisputed energy titan. But there is a catch. The American shale oil industry has a notoriously high break-even cost compared to Middle Eastern crude. To truly dominate the global market and guarantee massive profit margins, domestic energy giants need 2 things: sky-high prices and utterly desperate global buyers. What better way to manufacture that desperation than by artificially suffocating the planet's primary energy artery? This brings us to the quiet part that was finally said out loud. When President Trump casually stated on Fox News that countries needing oil should simply buy American, or perhaps Venezuelan, it was a masterful sleight of hand. Mentioning Venezuela, a nation whose oil infrastructure has been crippled by years of heavy U.S. sanctions and currently lacks the capacity to stabilize the global market, was nothing but a diplomatic smokescreen. It was a fake alternative designed to mask a monopoly. The real, terrifying message to global buyers was clear. You are going to buy American crude at our newly inflated prices, and you will have no other choice. The financial devastation is already taking shape. Leading analysts at Onyx Capital Group are sounding the alarm that if this blockade holds, oil could easily skyrocket past $150 a barrel. Goldman Sachs is projecting that a prolonged closure will shatter the $100 ceiling for Brent crude, unleashing a catastrophic wave of global inflation that will crush developing economies. And if you trace the campaign finance records back home, you will find millions in Political Action Committee donations flowing from these exact domestic energy corporations directly into the war chests of the politicians cheering the loudest for this military escalation. The United States government is not playing the role of a global policeman. They are acting like a ruthless arsonist who sets the entire neighborhood on fire, only to immediately set up a toll booth to sell you the water. Washington is not blockading Iran to protect the free world. They are holding the free world hostage to protect American profit. But here is the ultimate question that no one in Washington wants to answer. How long can the United States realistically sustain this siege before the walls of its own economy begin to crumble? The answer is terrifyingly short, because while the administration is busy playing a high-stakes game of global monopoly in the Middle East, they have triggered a catastrophic political boomerang right here at home. Look at the glaring numbers from the latest Pew Research Center polling. Nearly 70% of American citizens are now actively terrified, not just of a wider war, but of the crippling economic fallout crashing into their daily lives, and they have every right to be. Almost overnight, the average retail price for a gallon of gasoline has violently breached the $4 mark for the first time in 4 years, with diesel screaming toward a historic, suffocating high of nearly $5.80 a gallon. This is no longer just a foreign policy maneuver. It is a direct economic stranglehold on the American working class. There is an unwritten law in American politics known as the pump price curse. History offers a brutal lesson here. Just ask Jimmy Carter in 1980 or George H.W. Bush in 1992. When the cost of filling up a family minivan becomes a financial crisis, presidencies are destroyed. Trump himself recently made a rare and stunning admission, conceding that these inflated oil prices might linger right up until the November elections. This is perhaps the very first time we have witnessed this administration publicly acknowledge that their own geopolitical theater is violently backfiring on their electoral prospects. The political fractures inside Washington are already widening. We are now seeing hardline Republican lawmakers actively breaking ranks, publicly demanding an end to this blockade, and pleading for a return to the negotiating table. Why? Because you cannot look an American voter in the eye and tell them that their financial suffering is a necessary sacrifice to squeeze a nation halfway across the globe. And then, there is the invisible, catastrophic hemorrhaging of the American treasury. Let us look at the real data. Maintaining 16 warships, including a nuclear-powered Nimitz-class aircraft carrier, and its entire strike group on high-alert combat deployment in the Middle East, is an astronomical financial black hole. Pentagon estimates suggest that sustaining this maritime standoff is torching tens of millions of taxpayer dollars every single day. In an era where the United States is drowning in historic national debt and battling domestic inflation, this blockade is not a projection of American wealth. It is a financial vampire, aggressively feeding on the American middle class to sustain a foreign illusion. Throwing sanctions and blockades around the globe is like throwing a heavy boomerang in a pitch-black room. You might not see it coming back, but it is eventually going to hit you right between the eyes. An empire that bleeds its own citizens to starve its enemies is an empire rapidly writing its own obituary. When hegemony that once dictated global rules is reduced to relying on manufactured chaos and intimidation to maintain its status, it is absolutely not demonstrating strength, but rather its own irreversible anxiety and decline. This farce in the Strait of Hormuz is tearing away the final fig leaf of American energy dominance. What we are witnessing is not just a game of blockading ports, it is the collapse of an old world order. History has proven time and time again that the hand attempting to choke the throat of the world will ultimately be mercilessly crushed by the wheels of time. Thank you for watching. I am Eleanor Hayes. Please like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below about the future of the petrodollar and this shifting global landscape. I will see you in the next one.